My name is Avery Carter. I'm 33 years old, and people always say your wedding day is supposed to be the happiest day of your life. Mine became the day an entire family dynasty collapsed in front of 500 witnesses. As I stepped onto the marble aisle of St. Andrew Cathedral in downtown Charlotte, every eye in the room drifted away from the diamond tiara, the designer gown, and the orchestra playing softly behind me. They were staring at the bruise blooming beneath my left eye. No amount of makeup could completely hide it. A few guests exchanged uneasy glances. Some whispered. Most looked away. No one wanted to acknowledge what they were seeing. Across the altar stood Ethan Caldwell, 36, partner at one of the most influential investment firms in North Carolina. Handsome, polished, born into a family whose name opened doors that money alone never could. He smiled exactly the way everyone expected him to, confident, respectable, perfect. As my father placed my hand into his, Ethan leaned closer without moving his smile. The photographer kept snapping pictures. The pastor kept talking. No one noticed his lips barely moving. You should have learned when to keep your mouth shut. His voice was so calm, it sent a chill through my entire body. Then he glanced toward the first row. My mother, Patricia Carter, sat there wearing a cream-colored couture suit with the same expression she'd worn my entire life, whenever appearances mattered more than people. Ethan gave her the slightest nod. She returned it. That tiny exchange lasted less than 2 seconds, but it told me everything. They weren't nervous. They weren't ashamed. They believed they'd already won. The pastor invited everyone to bow their heads before the vows. 500 people lowered their eyes. I didn't. Instead, I reached into the bouquet I had carried down the aisle. Hidden beneath the white lilies was a small wireless remote. I pressed one button. Nothing happened. At least that's what everyone thought. 3 seconds later, every massive LED screen inside the cathedral flickered. The wedding slideshow disappeared. A security video replaced it. The timestamp read, 9:47 p.m. last night. Someone in the back gasped. Ethan's smile vanished. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked afraid. And that was exactly the moment I knew. The wedding was over before it had even begun. The truth is, my wedding didn't begin that morning. It started almost a year earlier, the day my mother decided my future was worth less than our family's reputation. Growing up, everyone in Charlotte knew the Carter family. If someone mentioned our name, people immediately thought about charity galas, museum fundraisers, political dinners, and newspaper society pages. We weren't celebrities, but in our world, influence mattered far more than fame. Appearances were everything. My mother, Patricia Carter, dedicated her entire life to protecting that image. Our house looked like something from a magazine. Fresh flowers every morning, perfect landscaping, crystal glasses nobody was allowed to touch, family portraits professionally updated every 2 years. From the outside, we looked untouchable. Inside, we barely resembled a family. I learned very early that love in our house always came with conditions. If I earned straight A's, my mother would ask why they weren't higher. If I won a scholarship, she'd remind me Madison had won too. If I built something successful, she'd explain why my sister's accomplishments still mattered more. There was always a comparison. Always another reason I wasn't enough. My older sister, Madison Carter, never had to compete. She was beautiful, elegant, the kind of woman who could walk into a ballroom and have strangers convinced she'd been born to own it. She loved cameras. She loved attention. More importantly, she loved being exactly who our mother wanted her to be. I was different. While Madison attended charity auctions and networking dinners, I spent nights teaching myself software architecture and cybersecurity. I liked solving problems, building systems, finding patterns nobody else noticed. My mother called it an unhealthy obsession. She once looked at my laptop and sighed. You spend your life staring at screens while your sister builds relationships. At the time, I didn't argue, I simply smiled. Years later, those same screens would expose every lie she ever protected. After graduating college, I founded a small cybersecurity consulting company with 2 former classmates. We rented a tiny office above an old coffee shop. The elevator barely worked. Our furniture came from secondhand stores. Some months we wondered if we'd make payroll. My mother visited exactly once. She looked around the office for less than 5 minutes. Before leaving, she quietly handed me one of Ethan Caldwell's business cards. "You should have dinner with him," I laughed. "I'm trying to build a company." "And he's trying to build a future," she smiled politely. "You need someone successful beside you." I glanced around our little office. "I am building something successful." She gave me that familiar disappointed expression. "Avery, no woman succeeds completely alone." That sentence stayed with me, not because it hurt, but because it explained everything. She never believed I could build a life on my own. Every achievement I earned was temporary. Every accomplishment needed a man standing beside it before it became real in her eyes. I ignored the card for nearly 4 months. Then Ethan appeared anyway, not by accident. At every fundraiser, every business luncheon, every charity dinner my mother somehow convinced me to attend, he was always there, always charming, always prepared, almost as if someone had carefully arranged every encounter. Looking back now, that's exactly what had happened. He already knew who I was. He knew my company had begun landing government cybersecurity contracts. He knew investors had started calling. He knew far more about my future than I knew about his past. But back then, I believed I was simply meeting an intelligent, successful man. One evening after dinner, he walked me to my car. "I like that you're different," I laughed. "My mother would disagree." "That's because she wants someone easier to control." For a brief second, I thought he understood me. I had no idea he was simply telling me exactly what I wanted to hear. 3 months later, we were engaged. My mother cried happier tears than she ever had for any achievement I'd accomplished. Not when I graduated, not when I launched my company, not when I signed my first 7-figure contract. Only when another family's last name was finally about to replace mine. At the time, I mistook relief for love. It would become the most expensive mistake of my life. If someone had asked me 6 months before the wedding whether Ethan Caldwell loved me, I would have answered without hesitation, yes. Not because he'd ever said anything extraordinary, not because he'd swept me off my feet, but because he was consistent. He remembered birthdays. He sent flowers after difficult meetings. He called my grandmother every Sunday. He knew exactly when to be thoughtful and exactly who needed to see it. That's what made him dangerous. Looking back now, I realize he wasn't building a relationship. He was building a reputation. Everyone believed he was the kind of man women dreamed about marrying. And slowly, I started believing it too. There were signs, of course, tiny cracks that appeared so briefly I convinced myself they didn't matter. The first happened after my company closed a major federal contract. It wasn't public information yet. Only a handful of executives even knew the deal existed. I came home excited. "I think we're finally going to expand," Ethan smiled. "That's incredible." Then he asked a question that felt oddly specific. "How much voting control do you still have?" I laughed. "What?" "Your company," he shrugged casually. "You've taken outside investment before." "I still own the majority." "You should think about changing that." I frowned. "Why would I do that?" "When we're married, you'll have more responsibilities." He poured himself another glass of wine. "It might be easier if someone else handled the business." I stared at him. "You mean hire another CEO?" "I mean," he smiled, "someone you trust." At the time, I thought he was trying to help. Now I understand. He wasn't asking about my future. He was calculating how close he was to controlling it. After that conversation, similar comments became more frequent. "You work too much." "Clients can wait." "Family comes first." "Why are you still taking late-night calls?" None of those statements sounded unreasonable on their own. Together, they slowly chipped away at my independence. The strange part was that everyone around me agreed with him, especially my mother. One afternoon, the 3 of us had lunch at her country club. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Ethan worries about you," I smiled politely. "I'm fine." "You've always buried yourself in work." "I enjoy my work." She exchanged a quick glance with Ethan. "Marriage requires sacrifice." I looked from one to the other. "What exactly am I supposed to sacrifice?" Neither of them answered directly. They didn't have to. The answer was obvious. My company, my time, my decisions, eventually, my identity. A few weeks later, another moment unsettled me. I had just finished a board meeting when my assistant rushed into my office. "Someone's waiting downstairs." I assumed it was a client. Instead, I found Ethan sitting in the lobby, He wasn't smiling. Why didn't you answer your phone? I was in a meeting. For 3 hours. Yes. He stood. You could have stepped out. I blinked. It was an executive session. I don't like not knowing where you are. His tone wasn't loud. It wasn't threatening. If anything, it was calm. Too calm. People walked past us without noticing anything unusual. But something inside me tightened. I told you where I'd be. You didn't answer. I was working. So was I. There was a long silence. Finally, he smiled. The charming Ethan returned as if nothing had happened. Forget it. He kissed my forehead. I just worry. That became his favorite sentence. I just worry whenever he questioned my schedule. I just worry whenever he wanted my passwords. I just worry whenever he insisted on knowing every meeting, every client, every trip. I just worry. Concern became the disguise for control. And because he never shouted, because he never lost his temper in public, no one, including me, recognized how carefully the cage was being built. Then came the engagement party. Nearly 200 guests filled the ballroom of the Crescent Hotel. Champagne flowed, speeches echoed through crystal chandeliers. My mother stood proudly beside Ethan as though she'd accomplished something extraordinary. Madison hugged me in front of the cameras. You finally found your perfect match. Everyone applauded. Later that evening, while guests danced, I stepped outside for some air. The terrace overlooked the city skyline. I was alone, or so I thought. Voices drifted from around the corner. Ethan and my mother. I'll handle Avery, Ethan said quietly. Just make sure she signs everything after the honeymoon. My mother's voice remained steady. She trusts you. She won't question it. She never questions people she loves. A knot formed in my stomach. Before I could hear anything else, footsteps approached. I slipped behind a stone column. Seconds later, they walked back into the ballroom wearing perfect smiles. I stood there frozen. Maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe they were talking about estate planning, maybe business paperwork, maybe anything else. That's what fear does. It offers comforting lies because the truth is too painful to accept. So I said nothing. I convinced myself I was imagining things. It was the last chance I had to walk away before everything became irreversible. The bruise on my wedding day didn't begin with a single punch. It began the night I chose to ignore the first undeniable warning. The first time Ethan hit me, he apologized before the bruise even had time to form. It happened on a rainy Thursday night, exactly 38 days before the wedding. I'd just returned from Washington after presenting a cybersecurity proposal to a federal agency. The trip had gone better than I expected. If everything stayed on track, it would become the largest contract my company had ever signed. I walked into Ethan's townhouse carrying 2 coffees and a folder full of notes. He wasn't in the kitchen. His phone was lying face up on the counter, the screen lit up. Patricia Carter, one unread message. Normally, I would have looked away. Instead, the preview appeared before I could stop myself. Don't push her tonight. Wait until the trust documents are finalized. I froze. My heart started pounding so loudly I could barely hear the rain tapping against the windows. A second message arrived almost immediately. If Avery starts asking questions, let me handle her. I wasn't supposed to see those texts. I knew that. But I couldn't pretend they didn't exist. I reached for the phone, not to snoop, just to understand what I was looking at. Before I could unlock it, a voice came from behind me. What are you doing? I turned so fast I nearly dropped the device. Ethan stood in the doorway, still wearing his overcoat. His expression wasn't angry. Not yet. I wasn't. You were reading my phone. It lit up. He walked toward me slowly. Give it back. I handed it to him immediately. I only saw the notifications. He checked the screen, then slipped the phone into his pocket. What did you read? Nothing important. What did you read, Avery? His voice had changed, still quiet but colder. I swallowed. Your messages with my mother. Silence. He stared at me for several long seconds. Then, he smiled. You've been under a lot of stress. What does trust documents mean? It's business. What business? Our future. My mother told you not to push me. You misunderstood. I don't think I did. I stepped backward. He stepped forward. You're making something out of nothing. Then explain it. I don't owe you an explanation every time you jump to conclusions. His words weren't what frightened me. It was the look in his eyes. The warmth I'd spent nearly 2 years believing in was gone. Completely. I want to postpone the wedding. The sentence left my mouth before I'd fully thought it through. His face didn't change immediately. Then something hardened. So that's what this is. No. You embarrass me over 2 text messages? I'm asking for time. You've had time. I need answers. He laughed once, a short, humorless sound. You sound just like people who don't know how to commit. I'm not talking about commitment. No. He took another step closer. You're talking about running. I said postpone. You said you don't trust me. I said I need honesty. For the first time since we'd met. He raised his voice. Honesty? The word echoed through the kitchen. I've done everything for you. No. You'd still be working 18-hour days if I hadn't taught you balance. I never asked you to. You wouldn't even have relationships with your own family. My family was never the issue. They're the only reason anyone tolerates your attitude. I stared at him. Did he really believe that? Or had he simply repeated my mother's opinions so many times they had become his own? I picked up my purse. I'm leaving. You walk out that door and don't bother coming back. I nodded slowly. Maybe that's exactly what I should do. I reached for the handle. His hand grabbed my wrist. Hard. Ethan, sit down. No. I said, sit down. Pain shot through my arm. You're hurting me. Then stop fighting. I pulled away instinctively. He shoved me back, not across the room. Not violently enough to send me flying. Just enough. Enough for the side of my face to strike the edge of a marble countertop. For a moment, everything went white. I tasted blood. My ears rang. When my vision cleared, Ethan was staring at me in disbelief. Neither of us spoke. A thin line of crimson slipped from the corner of my eyebrow. He looked at his own hands as if they belonged to someone else. Oh my God! He rushed forward. Avery. I stepped back. Don't. I didn't mean. Don't touch me. His breathing became uneven. I'm sorry, I said nothing. It was an accident. No, it wasn't. Maybe he hadn't planned it. Maybe he hadn't expected it. But it wasn't an accident. It was the first moment he stopped pretending to be someone else. Within minutes, the apologies began. He brought ice, a first aid kit, a clean towel, then flowers, then tears. By midnight, he was promising therapy. The next morning, he promised to postpone the honeymoon. By lunchtime, he had already convinced himself it would never happen again. The frightening part wasn't Ethan. It was what happened after, because when I drove to my mother's house, still wearing sunglasses to hide the swelling, I honestly believed she'd tell me to leave him. Instead, she closed the front door, looked at my face, and asked only one question. Did anyone else see you like this? That's when I realized. The bruise on my cheek wasn't the biggest danger I was facing. It was the family determined to make sure no one else ever saw it. When people imagine revenge, they picture shouting, broken glass, police sirens, someone finally snapping after years of suffering. Real revenge is quieter than that. It begins the moment you stop begging people to believe you. I left my mother's house that afternoon with 2 things, a pounding headache and absolute clarity. For the first time since meeting Ethan Caldwell, I stopped asking myself whether I was overreacting. I wasn't. The bruise on my face would heal. What wouldn't heal was marrying a man who had already learned he could hurt me and still keep everyone on his side. I drove straight to my office. No detours, no tears, no dramatic phone calls. By the time I reached downtown, the swelling around my eye had darkened into deep shades of purple. My receptionist stood up the second she saw me. Avery, I'm okay. You don't look okay. I know. She hesitated. Should I call someone? I almost laughed. Call who? My fiancé? My mother? The people responsible? Instead, I shook my head. Get Olivia and Noah into conference room 3. They were my 2 oldest business partners. People I'd trusted long before Ethan entered my life. 20 minutes later, the 3 of us sat around a table covered with laptops and legal folders. Neither of them asked about the bruise immediately. They waited. Finally, Noah spoke. Who did that? Ethan. Silence. Olivia slowly closed the notebook she'd been holding. When? Last night. Are you calling the police? I haven't decided. You have. She looked directly at me. You just haven't admitted it yet. I stared at the tabletop. I need to understand something first. I told them everything, the messages, the conversation at the engagement party, the pressure to sign documents after the wedding, the questions about my company, every detail. Neither of them interrupted. When I finished, Olivia leaned back. This isn't about anger. No? It's about money. Exactly. Noah turned his laptop toward me. Then let's answer one question. What question? What exactly are they trying to get? That afternoon became less about my relationship and more about an investigation. For years, our firm had specialized in protecting companies from cyber fraud, internal theft, and financial espionage. We knew how people stole information, how they hid transactions, how they erased digital footprints. Now, for the first time, we were investigating my own life. Noah started with something simple. Send me every document you've signed since the engagement. Everything? Everything. By sunset, my inbox was empty. His desk wasn't. Contracts, insurance forms, joint account paperwork, beneficiary updates, property disclosures. Half of them looked completely ordinary until they didn't. Around 7 that evening, Noah looked up from his screen. This clause wasn't in the original draft. What clause? He highlighted 3 lines buried near the end of a financial disclosure. If you're legally incapacitated. He stopped reading. Your spouse receives temporary authority to make business decisions connected to jointly disclosed assets. I frowned. My company isn't jointly owned. It doesn't have to be. He zoomed in farther. The wording is intentionally vague. Olivia read over his shoulder. Who wrote this? The law firm Ethan recommended. I remembered signing the packet 6 weeks earlier. Ethan had smiled across the dining table. It's just routine paperwork. Routine. That word suddenly made me sick. We kept digging. Every hour uncovered another coincidence. Every coincidence pointed toward the same people. The attorney handling our prenuptial agreement worked almost exclusively with Ethan's investment firm. The financial advisor recommending asset restructuring sat on the board of my mother's charitable foundation. Even the insurance broker had attended college with Madison. Individually, none of it proved a conspiracy. Together, it painted a picture that was impossible to ignore. Someone had spent months surrounding me with people I believed were independent. They weren't. They all belonged to the same circle. Around 9 that night, Olivia received a phone call. She glanced at the screen. It's Daniel Reeves. I recognized the name immediately. Our outside legal counsel, one of the few attorneys my mother had never been able to influence. Olivia answered on speaker. Avery, are you with her? I'm here. His voice was unusually serious. I need you to answer one question honestly. Go ahead. Has anyone recently pressured you to move personal assets after your wedding? I exchanged a look with Noah. Why? Because someone contacted my office this morning pretending to represent you. Every muscle in my body tightened. What? They requested copies of your corporate ownership records. I never authorized that. I know. Who was it? They used another attorney's credentials. Can you trace it? We're trying. The room fell silent. Daniel continued. I've already frozen the request. So no documents were released? No, but whoever submitted it knew exactly what to ask for. When the call ended, nobody spoke for several seconds. Finally, Noah broke the silence. They're moving faster than we thought, Olivia nodded. They expected you to stop asking questions after last night. Instead, I'd started collecting answers. For the first time since my engagement, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was preparing, not for revenge, for the truth. Because if Ethan and my own family were willing to forge legal requests before the wedding, then whatever they had planned afterward would be far worse than I had imagined. That night, before leaving the office, I opened the wedding invitation lying on my desk. Saturday, 11 o'clock, St. Andrew Cathedral. For weeks, I'd looked at it with excitement. Now, it looked less like an invitation and more like the date someone had chosen for a carefully planned takeover. The only difference was, they still believed I would walk into that cathedral completely blind. I intended to let them keep believing it. The next 2 weeks became a performance. Every smile I gave Ethan was rehearsed. Every dinner with my family felt like another scene in a play where everyone except me had already memorized the ending. The difference was, I'd finally been handed the real script. Ethan became even more attentive after that night. He sent breakfast to my office. He apologized again for losing his temper. He even scheduled appointments with a couples therapist I'd never asked for. If someone had been watching from the outside, they would have believed he was a man desperately trying to repair one terrible mistake. Sometimes, I almost believed it myself. That's the hardest part about manipulation. The kindness never completely disappears. It comes back just often enough to make you question your own memory. One Saturday afternoon, he showed up at my apartment carrying takeout from my favorite Italian restaurant. "I miss us," he said softly. I let him inside. Not because I'd forgiven him, but because I needed him to think I had. We ate on the balcony overlooking the city. For almost an hour, we talked about ordinary things. Movies, vacation plans, wedding flowers. It almost felt normal. Then he reached into his jacket pocket. "I brought something." He slid a thin envelope across the table. I didn't touch it. "What's this?" "Just paperwork," I smiled. "My favorite words," he laughed. "It's nothing complicated." I opened the envelope. Inside were several documents with colorful tabs marking the signature lines. "What am I signing?" Our financial planner suggested we simplify a few things before the wedding. I thought we'd already finished all of that. "We're just updating beneficiary information." I slowly flipped through the pages. There it was again. Legal language buried inside ordinary paperwork. Ownership, authority, emergency decision-making, power of attorney, different documents, same destination. I looked up. "You really trust paperwork," he smiled. "I trust planning." I closed the folder. I'd rather have Daniel review it first. For the first time all evening, his expression changed. "Daniel?" "My attorney." "Why?" "It's standard." "You don't trust me," I almost laughed. There it was, the same question, always disguised as hurt feelings, never framed as control. "I trust legal advice." "We're getting married?" "Exactly." His jaw tightened. "You think everything has to become a business transaction?" "No," I stood. "I just don't sign contracts without reading them." For several seconds, he said nothing. Then, the smile returned. "Of course." He reached for the folder. "I wasn't trying to pressure you." Lie. He absolutely was. But he left without arguing. The moment his car disappeared from the parking garage, I called Daniel. An hour later, we were sitting in his office. He skimmed the documents for less than 5 minutes before looking up. "Avery." "What?" "You cannot sign these." "They're that bad?" "They're much worse than bad." He turned one page toward me. "This clause gives your spouse temporary operational authority over any jointly disclosed financial interests." I've seen language like that before. "Yes, but not combined with this." He pointed farther down to a paragraph I'd never noticed. "If ownership becomes disputed," he paused, "control defaults to the acting spouse until litigation concludes." I stared at him. "How long could that take?" He shrugged. "Months, years, depending on the court." My stomach dropped. So if something happened immediately after the wedding, he could attempt to control major financial decisions while you fought him in court. He'd never win permanently. "No," Daniel leaned forward. "But temporary control is often all someone needs." Suddenly, every conversation, every signature, every reminder, every rushed deadline made perfect sense. This had never been about marriage. It had been about timing. I left Daniel's office carrying copies of every document. Instead of driving home, I drove somewhere I hadn't visited in months. The office building where Ethan's investment firm occupied 3 floors. Not to confront him, but to watch. Noah had arranged legal surveillance through a licensed investigator earlier that week. A black SUV waited across the street. Inside sat a retired detective named Frank Delaney. Gray hair, wrinkled suit. 30 years investigating financial crimes before retirement. He lowered a pair of binoculars. "You're early." "I couldn't stay home." He nodded toward the building. "They've been busy." "What have you got?" He handed me a folder. Photographs, dates, vehicle records, meeting schedules. One image caught my attention immediately. Ethan leaving a private restaurant, not alone. My mother sat beside him, across the table, a man I'd never seen before. Frank tapped the picture. Recognize him? No. His name's Richard Sloan. Who is he? He specializes in restructuring distressed companies. I frowned. My company isn't distressed. It would be, he looked directly at me, if its CEO suddenly lost control. The words settled over me like ice. Everything was fitting together, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to understand the direction, enough to know this wasn't simply a toxic relationship anymore. It was a coordinated plan. And I was the target. Frank slid one final photograph across the seat. It showed Ethan entering a law office 3 days earlier. The timestamp read, the exact same morning he claimed he'd been shopping for our honeymoon. I looked at the picture for a long time, then I smiled. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped hoping he was innocent. Sometimes the truth breaks your heart. Sometimes it sets you free. As I climbed back into my car, my phone buzzed. A text from my mother, "Don't be late. We only have 1 week left." I stared at the message, then typed my reply, "I'll be there." She thought I meant the dress. I was talking about the wedding, because after everything I'd learned, there was no chance I was missing it. Not when every person who had lied to me was planning to gather in one room. Not when they still believed I was the easiest woman in the world to deceive. They had spent months preparing for the perfect wedding. I had 1 week to prepare for something very different, the day the truth would finally introduce itself. The morning of the wedding was strangely peaceful. No panic, no tears, no second thoughts. I woke up before sunrise, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat alone on the balcony watching the city slowly come to life. People often imagine that courage feels powerful. It doesn't. Most of the time, it feels quiet, almost lonely. My phone buzzed just after 7. Patricia Carter. I already knew why she was calling. "Where are you?" "At home." "You should have been at the hotel an hour ago." "I'll be there." "You sound exhausted." "I didn't sleep much." A pause. Then her voice softened, not with concern, but with calculation. "Today changes everything, Avery." "I know. This family has sacrificed a lot for you." I closed my eyes. "No, Mom." Another silence. Then I corrected myself. "You've sacrificed me." She didn't respond. Instead, she hung up. For the first time in years, she had no answer. By 9 o'clock, the bridal suite was overflowing with stylists, photographers, and wedding coordinators. Someone adjusted my veil. Someone else fixed my bouquet. The room buzzed with nervous excitement. Only Madison seemed distracted. She kept checking her phone, walking into the hallway, returning a few minutes later and smiling a little too hard. "You okay?" I asked. She looked startled. "Of course." "You seem nervous," she laughed. "Every bride's sister is nervous." "No," I smiled gently. "You seem worried." For a split second, her confidence cracked. Then it disappeared. "I think you're imagining things." Maybe. Or maybe she already sensed something she couldn't explain. At 10:45, guests began filling St. Andrew Cathedral. Business leaders, judges, state senators, local television personalities, family friends who had known me since childhood. Almost everyone who mattered to the Carter family was there. Exactly as my mother had planned. She wanted witnesses, so did I. The orchestra began playing. The massive wooden doors opened. I stepped onto the aisle. The cathedral was breathtaking. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting ribbons of blue and gold across the marble floor. 500 faces turned toward me. Some smiled, some cried. Some noticed the faint bruise beneath my makeup. None of them knew what they were really about to witness. At the altar, Ethan waited with the same polished smile he'd perfected over 2 years. As I reached him, he leaned closer. "You look beautiful." "So do you." "You almost had me worried." "I know," he chuckled softly. "I told you everything would work out." I looked into his eyes. "No, Ethan," I answered quietly. "It finally will." He mistook my words for reassurance. That would become his final mistake. The ceremony began. The pastor welcomed everyone, read a passage about love, commitment, and faithfulness. The irony was almost unbearable. Halfway through the service, my mother looked toward me. She smiled proudly, exactly the same smile she'd worn at every fundraiser, every gala, every public event where appearances mattered more than truth. She thought she was watching the greatest victory of her life. She had no idea. She was sitting in the front row of her own downfall. Then came the moment. If anyone has reason, these two should not be joined in marriage. The pastor smiled politely. Speak now or forever, hold your peace. The room remained silent. Exactly 3 seconds. I slowly released Ethan's hand. Every head turned. The pastor looked confused. Avery, I took one step away from the altar, then another. Instead of answering him, I turned toward the guests. My entire life. My voice echoed gently through the cathedral. I've been taught that protecting your family is always the right thing to do. 500 people watched without moving. So today, I glanced toward my mother. I'd like to stop protecting mine. A murmur swept across the room. Ethan reached for my arm. Avery. I stepped away before he could touch me. No. I pulled a small remote from inside my bouquet. This time, I smiled calmly. Everyone gets to see the version of our family that never appears in Christmas cards. Across the cathedral, the enormous LED screens flickered. The elegant wedding slideshow disappeared. Black, then, video. The timestamp appeared. 9:47 p.m., 7 days earlier. The first image showed the security footage from Ethan's kitchen. The room fell completely silent. Guests watched as Ethan grabbed my wrist, heard his voice, saw me strike the marble countertop, saw the blood, and heard him apologize. No narration, no dramatic music, just the truth. Gasps echoed through the cathedral. Someone in the third row whispered, "Oh my God!" But I wasn't finished. The screen changed again. Audio recording, clear, undeniable. Ethan's voice, "She'll sign everything after the honeymoon." Then another voice, Patricia Carter, "She trusts you. Leave the paperwork to me." The cathedral exploded with whispers. My mother stood so quickly her chair tipped backward. "Turn it off." Nobody moved. Madison's face turned white. Ethan stared at the screen as if willing it to disappear. Then, the final recording began. Daniel Reeves appeared from a side entrance with 2 investigators and several uniformed officers. Not rushing, not dramatic, professional, calm. Daniel addressed the guests. "Mr. Caldwell." He looked directly at Ethan. "Earlier this morning, a civil court issued emergency orders freezing the transfer documents prepared under your direction." Another investigator stepped forward, and multiple fraudulent document requests submitted in Ms. Carter's name are now part of an active financial crime investigation. The room became deathly quiet. No shouting, no chaos, just the unbearable weight of reality settling over everyone present. Ethan finally looked at me. "You planned this." I met his eyes. "No," I answered softly. "You planned it. You just forgot." I paused. That I finally stopped believing your lies. He took one desperate step toward me. 2 officers immediately intercepted him. Across the aisle, my mother looked as though she had aged 10 years in 10 seconds. For the first time in my life, she wasn't worried about her reputation. She was terrified of the truth. I looked around the cathedral one last time, at the flowers, the candles, the guests, the dress I'd once dreamed of wearing. Then I quietly removed my engagement ring, walked to the altar, and placed it beside the untouched wedding vows. I came here today expecting to become someone's wife. I smiled through tears that no longer came from pain. Instead, I finally became myself. Without another word, I turned and walked down the aisle alone, not abandoned, not defeated, free, and for the first time in years. The applause following me wasn't for a perfect wedding. It was for a woman who finally chose herself.